and welcome to the Scandinavia mitten help video. Now, this video will help you, I hope, knitting any thumb and also show you how I catch my floats. I will also show you how I close the gaps that may occur around the thumbs when you pick up stitches. It's not a lot of magic and it's perfectly doable. If you're new to knitting, just keep in mind before you go ahead and purchase this pattern that this pattern is not written out for beginners. It is written out for those of you who already know how to knit either or stranded colorwork or mittens, and I think beginners can do it. A tip before you start knitting the mittens: when you knit from a mitten chart like this is a basic Selbu mitten recipe with my pattern in it. So when you come to a chart for a Selbu mitten like this, where there's a thumb gusset, when you knit the cuff and you increase a few stitches to start the actual mitten, there will be gaps in the chart. Those gaps are there because the stitches in the gap area doesn't exist yet, because you have fewer stitches when you start off and you increase the stitches to the full width of the chart in the gusset area. So keep in mind when you knit a chart for a stranded colorwork mitten like this, that the squares are stitches and the gaps are not. So when you come to a gap, just skip right over to the next square and just keep on knitting as if they were all together. So that is why the gaps are there. There are a lot of questions about that going around. Now you know. When it comes to yarn, please, before considering superwash yarn, if you use superwash yarn, I would really recommend to go down a needle size, because superwash yarn with use will get floppy and saggy, and in the end it won't be superwash anymore anyway, because if you wash it, the layer that makes it superwash will disappear. So I always recommend using 100% wool or a wool alpaca blend. This is a wool alpaca blend. I also have a project on the needles right now with this pattern that is 100% wool. So yeah, go for a non-superwash yarn. This is made for fingering weight, but you can, if you're gonna knit this for larger hands, you can easily use DK weight and play around that way. If you have any questions regarding my patterns, please do as I say in the pattern. You use the subject box and state what your message is about. It is going to be so much easier for me to filter the messages and prioritize the ones that are important, like pattern support. So make sure we always use the subject box so I know what it is about. Because if not, you're just gonna end up in the bottom of the list. I may not get back to you for weeks. I'm not popping up in the video with help before I'm actually done with the increase here, which is why I went into depth in how to knit the thumb increase before we actually get to that point. So I'm gonna show you how I place the live stitches on my, well, I use scrap yarn in this video. You can use a stitch holder, it's completely up to you. Then I'm going to show you how I pick up the stitches for the thumb, and then I'm going to show you how I catch my floats and how I close the gaps around the thumb area. Okay, let's get started. And also keep in mind, this is not a tutorial. It's only a help video showing you how I do it. Don't be afraid to play around and discover ways that suit you better. Okay, so I am going to catch my floats right now. I have seen a couple of videos on YouTube on how others do it, and it's not like that. I tend to do things the easy way, so I'm going to knit 8 stitches now, and I would like to catch my floats every 4th stitch when I do that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I now just flick these around each other, catching that, and continue knitting. The next time I'm gonna do it the opposite way. So every other way. If you forget, it's easy, just, you know, making sure that the balls aren't too tangled. Okay, so like I said, I do it the other way around. I just flick them around each other, like so, and continue knitting. And if you think it looks fiddly, just try it. Sometimes it's easier getting things down by actually doing them while watching someone else do them, because just watching something doesn't necessarily mean that you get it. Sometimes, at least for me, getting it into the muscles right away really does help. Okay, so I've threaded some cotton thread, just some regular crochet cotton, onto my needle, and I am gonna thread it through the stitches that are marked in the red box while they are still on the needle. How you do this is, of course, completely up to you. I just like doing it this way, just because casting on the new stitches is gonna be slightly more simple. If you use scrap yarn, make sure that you tie a knot so that it doesn't come apart. You want to make sure that those stitches are secured. So I am gonna continue in this pattern, meaning that the first stitch here is gonna be in my contrast color, which in this case for me is brown. And now I'm gonna cast on the same amount of stitches that I placed here, and I'm going to continue in this manner. So for the first stitch, I'm just going to loop it up, twist it, and place it on the needle. Then I'm going to do the same with the brown, loop it up, place it on the needle. I'm going to do this every other time because that's the pattern, every other stitch in the palm. Main color, contrast color. And that's how I do it. This makes sure that you cast on according to according to the pattern. So the stitches you cast on are the stitches on the row right now above the stitches in the red box. So when you come around, you're going to see that you're going to knit the stitches that you cast on in the opposite color. And I'm going to come back and show you, when I'm done with my mitten, how to pick up stitches for the... Okay, so never mind the not so fancy setup in the background here. I'm using this as a footstool. But I'm coming around to this thumb hole of mine where I cast on new stitches. And if you've never done this before, the stitches will be somewhat twisted. And it's only going to be a loop. So make sure you don't tighten the stitches and go in through like so and just knit it like a normal stitch. It's very important not to have too tight of a tension here because that's going to make this a pain in the arse. Okay. We are now going to pick up stitches for the thumb. The first thing you're going to do is place these stitches, live stitches here. They are marked in a red square in the pattern. And I want to do that while I still have them on my scrap yarn here. So dividing the stitches on the first few rounds aren't that important. Just get them up there, pick them up, and knit a few rounds according to the chart. This can be a little fiddly, just take your time. And if you split your ends, it's not a big deal because you can go back and fix that once you've removed your piece of scrap yarn. Now the chart has you with a stitch here first. If you want to pick up that first, that is completely fine. I, however, just pick up, take a note that the stitch before here, so the last stitch I pick up is the first on the round. You can see that in the chart. Like I say, just put a note as to where you are according to the stitches in the chart and on the needles, so that when you have knit a couple of rounds, this is how I do it. You can, of course, play around and see if you find ways that fit you better. And this one is a little tricky. It's way down there. It helps pulling on the, oops, on the scrap yarn. I always find knitting thumbs a bit tedious, just because there's so few stitches on there. So I just snap the yarn and I'm going to pull it out. These stitches are now secured on the needle, and you're going to start here picking up, because these stitches are already knit. So the beginning of the chart is these stitches, and you're going to pick up stitches continuing the chart. The next stitch I am going to pick up is brown. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm going to assume that you either have the pattern to follow along or are watching this video because you're interested in seeing if this video can actually help you. So what I do, I grab my yarn. When I first started knitting mittens, I picked up in one color and I just knit around, and you can of course do that. When you pick up stitches, so this is the cast on edge, as you can see here, and I cast on in 2 colors, which I'm going to get back to. When you pick up stitches, you're just going to have to try out several places and see where it fits the best. I like starting right next to that last stitch, and like I say, it can be a little fiddly just because of the small circumference. The next stitch is going to be white, so I'm going to hold on here to the stitch on the needle and the thread, and I'm going to grab the white and have that ready. I'm going to go into not the same space but close to the cast on edge and close to the stitch I already picked up. I'm going to wrap my yarn, and there you go, you picked up 2 stitches. I'm going to assume, since this pattern isn't written out for beginners, that you have already knit either colorwork or mittens already. If you're new, just take your time, don't be afraid to fail. It happens. I still do that. It's just, it's a matter of taking your time, not focusing on these needles, but focusing on the one that you're actually working on. And again, if you knit magic loop, this is going to look different. I don't knit magic loop, so I can't instruct that. Okay, so according to my chart, I am now just going to pick up every other stitch brown and white. And when you do that, you're going to start on the cast on edge right here, and it looks like this. Now grab white when you pick up brown and brown when you pick up white to have it look the best according to the pattern on the inside of the thumb here. This is now where we're at, and as you can see, it's not 100%, but you know, it's pretty darn okay. Like I say, grab a white strand when you pick up brown and a brown strand when you pick up white, and you do that for as many stitches as you are told in the pattern. And you might have to go back and redo it, but it's okay. So I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna pick up the 2 last stitches in between here, just like I did over there. And then I'm gonna come back and show you how I get started in knitting these side stitches to close the gaps as good as you can. Okay, so it may not look as much right now. I've divided the stitches to 4 needles so that I can easily handle the stitches. And before I keep knitting, because I've just knit across the first stitches of the chart, and before I keep knitting, I'm going to place that brown stitch that I picked up at the end there onto my first needle, because this is the beginning and end of the round. This is needle 1, this is needle 4. When I come back around, I need to remember that I have not yet knit this stitch, so I'm going to do with that stitch what I do with these. So for these first rounds, I keep both my strands on my left hand, but when I've knit a couple of rounds, I automatically place my main color on my left hand and my contrast color on my right hand, and I flick that over every time I need it. That's how I knit color work. You can, of course, use other methods. Okay, so for these stitches that I picked up, they are going to be very loose. Make sure that you use pretty long ends when you knit them, so that they don't come loose. Knit them through the back loops. That way, when you pull those strands in to sew them in on the inside, as you can see right now, they are very loose, but that is because the strand is loose on the inside. Once you pull those in and start weaving them in on the inside of the mitten, those will close, and having knit them through the back loops will close those gaps even more if you get gaps. And then you just keep knitting according to the chart. Okay, that was actually a edge stitch that I picked up, so I need to knit that through the back loop. I'm just going to get rid of those strands right there. And I'm going to knit this through the back loop. Okay, so now I'm at the first stitch of the round, but I have not yet knit this through the back loop. And like I say, this is how I do it. You might find other ways to knit your thumb that, you know, suits you the best. Now I'm going to show you what my thumb looks like on the other hand that's actually finished. As you can see here, there's no major gaps. Let's see if I can get that to focus a little better. Right there. And right there. And the only thing, there's a couple of small gaps here, but that is to be expected. I have not sewn close any gaps here. The only thing I've done is knit the stitches through the back loops and pull them in and sewn them in on the inside of the mitten. So that's how I do it. I hope it's helpful. Okay guys, we are now excuse me. We are now at the point where I need to grab my needle and sew in these two ends. As you can see here, this is the other side where I picked up stitches, and there's not very much gaping here. So I am just going to go to the other side of the thumb and pull on these two threads. And as you can see, just doing that closes the gap. So how I close my gaps may be very different from how you do it, but this is a video on how I do it. In case you don't know and haven't done it before, at least you get a start. You can of course change it up as you like. So what I like to do is just go under, when I use white, I go under white and make sure that I don't penetrate the fabric, so I don't come to the other side. And I pull it up and pull a little on it, and then I go down a stitch, not the same, because that is going to have it unravel. So I go back the same way. My goodness, what is this? And I fasten the thread again, and I do this to be extra sure, and especially if you're using superwash yarn, this is super important, because superwash yarn does not stick to itself. So to be able to actually secure the threads with superwash yarn, you definitely need to do more than just go one way. I have had several superwash items where I actually need to reattach my
my threads. So anyway, like I probably would have said in the beginning for the intro to this video, I really recommend you to use 100% wool yarn or wool alpaca blend and not superwash. So for the brown, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to find some brown and go under, and might just do that right here. Yeah, so let's do that. And I'm watching through the screen of my phone. Let's see if I can get just a little better focus. Like this. And I'm just going to go like that. Oh. And this is how I do it on top here as well. As you can see here, I pulled the white down and went up. So this is how I fasten my ends and how I close those gaps. And my shorts are a little end. Wow. My ends are a little short, so I just pull them out and thread the needle after I've actually gone under the stitches. So if you have short ends, you can still attach them like so. Okay. Let's see how that looks. Like so, like so, like so. Okay. Woo. It's not easy looking at the screen instead of what you're actually doing. So this is it. This is what it looks like. It's a little gappy here. If I wanted to, I could have gone in here, attached some brown perhaps to the brown on the other side and sewed a little bit around and pulled close, but I don't think this is going to be something that people are going to stare at and say, oh my goodness, you got gaping holes in your mitten. So that is how I do it. You might find that you can adapt this to a style that suits you better, whatever suits you. And yeah, those are the Scandinavia mittens. Yay! Okay guys, I hope you have enjoyed and will enjoy my first ever stranded color work mitten pattern Scandinavia.